Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am Ryan Wexelblatt, otherwise known as ADHD Dude, and this is Less Fortnite, More Hanging Out, teaching boys with ADHD how to connect with other boys. I am really grateful that you are joining me today, and I just want to start off about what I hope you'll take from today. So, first thing is learn the difference between social cognitive skills or social thinking skills and social skills. Understand how social learning challenges present in boys with ADHD, why traditional social skills groups are not effective for boys as well as girls with ADHD, how I destigmatize social learning challenges for the kids I work with. You'll see how I teach social to the kids I work with, and some of my do's and don'ts for parents. The other thing I want to mention is you're not going to be seeing me during this presentation because if I have the camera on, it covers up some of the slides, and I know people like reading the slides, and I have a lot of pictures as well. So let me tell you a little about myself and how I got into this work. So I have a little bit of an unusual story. I have a 22-year-old son who I actually adopted as an older child when he was 8. So we celebrated our 14th Gotcha Day on Halloween. Um, and he's actually the reason I kind of got into the social learning field. I had started working in special ed as soon as I finished graduate school, and then when Austin came along, I realized that he needed a lot of help with social skills, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in the next slide. So a little bit about my background. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, a school social worker, certified ADHD professional, and I am the father to a son with social learning challenges. I've done extensive training in the social thinking methodology, as well as some other areas as well, like cognitive behavior therapy for kids specifically around anxiety, and a lot of executive function training as well. I am the founder of ADHD Dude and Trip Camp, where I provide parent webinars. I do individual coaching with kids and parents. I provide school year social learning programs for boys and a summer camp program as well. I create content for Attitude Magazine's ADHD and Boys section, and I have a YouTube channel called ADHD Dude, and I also have a Facebook group that you're welcome to join. And you could read more about my training and experience at my website. And this is a picture of my son Austin and our puppy Flora, who I hope is not going to start crying as I'm recording this. All right. So when Austin came to me, as I mentioned, one of the things I'll tell you is for kids who have been through the foster care system as he had, they often have underdeveloped social skills. So I started looking around in the area. I'm originally from the Philadelphia area. I should mention I live outside of Atlantic City, New Jersey now. So when I was looking around for social skills groups for Austin, here's what I found. I found a lot of one size fits all groups comprised of kids with varying degrees of social learning challenges and neurodevelopmental profiles. So there would be a kid with ADHD. There might be a kid with, autism that was moderately verbal, and all these different kinds of profiles together in one group. I found a lot of groups teaching a new skill each week. So one week was turn taking, another one, was handling bullying and things like that. And I realized that's not how social skills develop organically. And I saw a lot of sitting, in an office, a therapist's office with a group facilitator kind of prompting kids what to say and ask. And here's what I didn't find. I didn't find anything that had any resemblance to real life social interactions with kids his age. Now, I should have prefaced this by telling you the area that I'm from in Philadelphia, I nicknamed the therapy capital of America. There are probably more therapists per square mile in the area where I'm from than anywhere else in the country. And that goes for social skills groups as well. And this picture up here is just a concept I teach kids. You're going to see pictures throughout the presentation. And this is about teaching kids kind of the continuum from being an information informer, which is, when you kind of talk at somebody and have one-sided conversations, to being a social relator, which is when you're showing an interest in others. So this is a difficult concept for a lot of kids with ADHD. And if you see where the initials are up here, what I do is I actually ask kids to rate themselves where they think they fall on this continuum. And most of the time I find they're pretty accurate. So, despite what some people think, this still happens daily. Kids still hang out daily. I think a lot of parents think that all kids just sit home all day and just play Fortnite or Minecraft or whatever these days, but kids still hang out. And I actually, where the community where I live, there's kids outside all the time riding their bikes around and, hanging out. And I'm always really happy to see that because I know a lot of kids are not doing that. So I want to talk a minute about where the adults went wrong because this is an aspect of why kids aren't interacting socially as much. So there's a lot of irrational fears for kids' safety that are not based in data. So I'll give you an example. Every generation thinks that the world is a more dangerous place than when they were growing up, and that's just not based in data. The world is actually safer now than it ever has been for kids. So this idea that the world's a more dangerous place is kind of perpetuated by media, and there's a whole history about it that's kind of been documented. I think a lot of parents have lost sight of the importance of being outdoors, playing, and hanging out. I do see a lot of kids who are overscheduled. They're going from one activity to the next. They might have sports 4 nights a week. Um, I see a lot of hovering, refusal to give kids an age appropriate amount of autonomy. So kids who are not allowed to just kind of go out independently and be with friends or, do whatever they might do. A cultural shift towards a more permissive, indulgent parenting style leading to excessive screen time. And I think that's a really important variable here because really when we think about it, as kids kind of started going on screens more and more, it just kind of became normalized. So the more something becomes more normalized, people think, oh, well, that's what everybody's doing. And that's what all kids do now. And again, that's not, the case. So I wanted to tell you about what I often see happen in families of boys with ADHD. I sometimes see kids who have a propensity to be inflexible. They will say no to anything new or unfamiliar, when it comes to social experiences, and the parents acquiesce and they don't say you're going. Around 10, so fifth grade, I see a lot of kids start to become more excluded socially, and the excessive gaming tends to start. And a lot of parents I find don't know that out of sight, out of mind is really common in boys with ADHD. And when I say out of sight, out of mind, what I mean is they might have friends in school, but when they're not in school, they're not thinking about them really because they're not with them. So what happens is there's this lack of social interaction outside of school or structured activities, and it really kind of becomes minimal or non-existent because parents are not pushing socializing, or giving kids enough independence to socialize. And again, mentioned that I see a lot of, irrational fears, which I understand with kids with ADHD, particularly, impulsive ones. And again, with the overscheduling, I understand why a lot of parents of kids with ADHD want to keep their kids active, which I completely appreciate. But, that's not the way you develop skills, is by always being in structured activities. So I want to define social learning challenges and social cognitive skills. So social learning challenges is a term to describe when somebody does not learn social information intuitively from a young age to the same extent as their peers. And really what this stems from, it's from weak social observational skills. And this is really an aspect of executive functioning. So, social cognitive skills are how we think in a social context and apply social skills relevant to the situation. So, let me give you an example. When I'm having a conversation with you, I have to think about, am I giving too much information? Are you interested in hearing this? What are you thinking about what I'm talking about? Do you seem interested, from your facial expressions and so on? And if I'm not using those skills, those social thinking skills, I might just have a one-way conversation where I'm talking at you because I'm not thinking socially about you. So, what do social learning challenges look like? So, number one, if you kind of look at this almost like a pyramid, the foundation of this would be perspective taking skills. So, understanding others' thoughts and feelings and understanding how you come across to others. And again, this is an aspect of executive functioning because it requires self directed talk, or what I call with kids their brain coach. Lack of situational awareness, which people call reading a room a lot. Kids with ADHD have difficulty with, kind of taking different pieces of information, putting them together as a whole, and making meaning of them. So, a lot of kids with ADHD can do fine in structured activities. It's unstructured activities such as recess where they struggle because they're not, as I say, reading the field to kind of figure out what's happening around them or what's coming up and figure it out what they should be doing. Another example of this is if your son or daughter has ever walked into the street without looking, that's a lack of situational awareness. Understanding others' humor and using humor appropriately. So a lot of kids with ADHD find that they if they can get a laugh with something, they're going to keep doing it over and over because it worked once, and they're not necessarily thinking this joke is getting old or this might start irritating kids. Another important one, relating to others' emotional experiences. So, for instance, if I tell you something sad, I want you to respond in a certain way. If I tell you something happy, I want you to respond in a certain way. So sometimes kids with ADHD, if somebody says something, enthusiastically to them, they might just say, "Oh," or same thing if somebody tells them something sad. And one of the things I hear sometimes, I have to tell you, that really drives me crazy is when parents say, "My son lacks empathy." And what I explain to him is that he doesn't lack empathy. He lacks probably perspective taking skills, and he has difficulty relating to others' emotional experiences. In my experience, most kids with ADHD have a tremendous amount of empathy. I actually think they have more empathy than your average person. And what really drives me crazy is when I hear a therapist say this to kids. So please know that, your son or daughter doesn't lack empathy. They are lagging in these skills. For elementary school, there's a lot of difficulty sharing imagination during unstructured play and difficulty engaging in reciprocal play. So think about this, if younger kids are pretending something, they're playing a game, they have to kind of join together and have to, one has to go along with the other one's imagination, and there needs to be a little level of flexibility there to interact in that play. So if you lack that flexibility, you're going to have difficulty sharing imagination and engaging in reciprocal play. And what that often leads to is a lot of what we call parallel play, where kids might be playing near each other, but they're not interacting or playing together. I wanted to talk to you about some common misconceptions about difficulty with social skills in kids with ADHD. So one I hear a lot is, missing nonverbal communication. I don't find that to be the case. I find kids with like nonverbal learning disorder miss nonverbal communication a lot, or kids with Asperger's. I don't find that with kids with ADHD. Another common misconception, he doesn't read social cues. And if you think about it, that's really a vague term. And what I explain to parents is, this goes so much deeper than not reading social cues, because there's so much more involved in it. Another misconception, you need a social skills group to improve social skills. Research actually shows that social skills groups are not helpful for kids with ADHD. And I can tell you that has certainly been my experience from the kids I've worked with who have been in social skills groups. But more importantly, it's very much been the experience of almost every parent who I speak with. Another thing is, a lot of parents think difficulty with social skills is a mental health issue. I believe it's a learning issue. So a lot of times parents will take their, their son or daughter to a therapist expecting that that's going to help them socially. And it doesn't, because this is not a mental health issue. And, I really also explain to people, I should say, that I perceive ADHD as being more of a learning issue than a mental health issue. And, it's a learning issue of lagging skills, and we have to teach those skills. And that's really kind of my whole approach here. And I think it's just a lot less pathologizing than, talking about disorders and comorbidity and, heaping labels on kids. And I'll just give you an example real quick. When my son first came to me, he must have had 7 different diagnostic labels. And none of them were actually accurate, so when I hear parents say something like, well, my son has ADHD and ODD, what I often say to them is, ODD is a description of inflexible behaviors that might be, just based in difficulty with perspective taking. So not understanding somebody else's point of view. They can be based in anxiety. They can be based in a need for control. And I really want parents to think of that just as part of some kids' ADHD profile than another, diagnostic label to put on them. The other thing that people also have a misconception about is that you need positive peer role models to improve social skills. So every 504 plan or, IEP I see that has something, about social skills in it will have something like, Ryan will, be in your positive peer role models. And what I explain to people is you don't develop social skills from osmosis. Okay. And think about it this way. Let's say you have an 11 or 12-year-old who struggles socially. They've been in school now for years. So if peer modeling worked, wouldn't their social skills have improved significantly during that time? So again, the reason for this is because you're born with weak social observational skills. You're not picking up and learning social information intuitively to the same extent as your same age peers. Role playing. Lots of parents think you have to role play to improve social skills. I don't do any role playing at all for the most part. And I'll tell you why. Because all social interactions are context dependent. We change our communication based on who we're with, and that varies on so many different variables. So what I say is, if you want to role play, well, then you have to do every single, permutation of that social situation, which could be in the billions. So you do not need to role play to improve social skills. The other thing I find really, really common, and I will tell you, I see this all the time, even with psychologists or neuropsychologists or developmental pediatricians, and with mental health professionals in general, they tend to mistake social anxiety for social learning challenges. Social anxiety is not the same thing as social learning challenges. It has to be addressed differently, that's what got me into doing training in cognitive behavior therapy, actually. And somebody can have both social anxiety and social learning challenges. What I see a lot is for the guys I work with that, if they were more impulsive or hyper when they were younger, and they tended to attract negative attention, when they start to quiet down, by ninth or 10th grade, so usually around 15 or 16, I sometimes find that they've developed some social anxiety, and they're kind of scared of interacting with other kids because they're scared kids are going to judge them as they did when they were younger, because they have difficulty kind of seeing themselves as having better self-regulation skills than they did when they were younger. So this is how social skills naturally develop, through unstructured play or hanging out where adults are not directing things. I want you to think about when you were growing up, if you went outside to play, and your parents said maybe come home by dark. That was actually how you were developing social and executive function skills. That's how it develops naturally. All right. So when you think about it, if you go to any elementary school right now, what you would see, around the playground is probably 3 or 4 adults there saying to kids, don't do this, stop, and they're not always giving kids, their intentions are good, but they're not giving kids a chance to work things out on their own. And again, that's part of the process here. Now, for a lot of kids with ADHD who struggle with recess, that's really the time that would be best to teach them social skills. But obviously we don't do that. In school, we put them into, a social skills group with a speech language pathologist or guidance counselor and, teach them some things, but it really doesn't have practical application in my experience. So this is not how social skills develop. They don't develop from sitting around, in a group therapy type of model. They don't develop through playing, cooperative games like this. Again, these are just not organic to the way social skills develop naturally. And you might be saying, well, why did my child's therapist recommend a social skills group? What I can tell you is, again, every therapist, every evaluation I've ever read, recommends social skills groups. And it's just because, to be honest, I think people are not familiar with the research that shows they're really not effective. So I just wanted to share this quote. This is from, I think her first name is Amori Mikami, who's doing really interesting research on social skills and ADHD at University of Vancouver. And this quote, although social skills training is a common intervention approach, evidence to date suggests that social skills training has limited efficacy, at least when provided in traditional clinic-based settings. And this is a picture from one of my How to Hang Out groups, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And, one of the things I do in the groups, just to kind of explain this picture to you, is if it was, during the winter like this group was, I have Legos in my office and, I do my lesson. And then the kids, will play with Legos and I intervene as little as possible. And then we go out for ice cream or whatever it might be. So you cannot improve social skills by having an adult facilitate the conversation or a game, by learning scripted, socially appropriate responses. So by saying like, how is your day going? Okay. You can't improve social skills by being around peers with more developed social skills, as I mentioned earlier. You can't improve social skills by addressing a different skill each week, because that is really not, how we learn socially. Again, role playing good social skills is not the way you develop better social skills. And you certainly can't develop better social skills by having people constantly tell you what you shouldn't be doing. And that's what we tend to do a lot with kids with ADHD, right? We tend to tell them a lot what they shouldn't be doing, and kind of forget, just in these kind of unnoticeable moments of, giving them purposeful recognition for what they should be doing in social situations. A little more about why social skills groups don't work for boys with ADHD. So, as I mentioned, that was my experience with my son. Most social skills groups take this one size fits all approach. So, all kids, different kids group together, and nobody assesses their social learning needs. So, in the methodology I use, there's actually an informal assessment you use to kind of see where somebody falls, in terms of their, ability to pick up social information. Um, Most mental health professionals actually have no education or training in addressing social learning challenges. I can tell you in my graduate program, ADHD was mentioned once in a psychopathology class. Maybe we talked about it for 10 minutes. Social learning challenges or difficulty with social skills, never mentioned. Other reason why is because social skills groups have no resemblance to real life social situations. And here's one that I was really hesitant to talk about for a while. And then when I finally did, it really resonated with people. So over, I would say 90, we could even say maybe 90% of the people who teach social skills are women teaching social skills primarily to boys. And understandably, most of these professionals with the best of intentions, they were never part of a male peer group growing up, nor have they spent time learning about male-male social communication or how male friendships develop. So as a result, what I often find is that they are teaching kids overly formal etiquette. And I really like this quote from Dr. Lynn Turkstra, who's a speech language pathologist. And she said in the full free frontal podcast interview with her, she said, "That's what made me very mindful of. Are we a bunch of female clinicians imposing our idea of the gold standard of social behavior on a mostly male client population? And is that okay?" And I would say she's 100% accurate there. The other thing I want to mention real quick is I never got into this field specifically to work with boys. That was never on my radar. And the reason I started doing groups just for boys was because I didn't want to have like one girl and like seven boys in a group because that would be uncomfortable for the girl. Or I didn't even want to have two girls and like six boys because what if the girls didn't like connect? So that's why I started just doing it for boys. And to my surprise, it really resonated with mothers more than anybody. And they really appreciated that. And that's how I kind of started specializing in boys, was really just the feedback from the moms of the kids I was working with. So I want to talk a little bit about what I find with the guys I work with. Second grade, I often call the entry point into noticing social learning challenges, because it's when other kids start to, realize, around that age 7, 8, I like him. She's not nice to me. She's kind of weird. He's mean. That's when kids start to notice kind of, social differences. Um, and one of the things I will say is parents often start noticing this in second grade, but don't really see it an issue often until fifth grade, so around age 10 or 11. So fifth grade. So here's what happens in fifth grade, particularly the second half of fifth grade, after January. Well, social expectations increase. Kids, both boys and girls, become more interested in being part of a same-sex peer group. And their mind is, a little more towards adolescence. So that's when we tend to see social learning challenges really kind of start to become more pronounced because of that rise in social expectations and because of more, kids wanting to be part of a same gender peer group. And interestingly, I will tell you that around eighth grade, ninth grade, so age 14 to 15, is when I find many parents decide to address this after realizing that their son went through middle school socially isolated. What I always tell people is it's never too late to work on improving social competency, but the earlier we start, the better. And the other thing I want to mention too, for all the kids I work with, is what I say is their most difficult school subject is recess. Why? Because recess is unstructured, it's chaotic. And if you have difficulty with situational awareness and, with those play skills I mentioned earlier, recess is really going to be a struggle for you. One of the things I always do with kids when I evaluate them is I ask them what they do during recess. Or if they're like in middle school or high school, I ask, what did you do during recess in elementary school? And the answer I hear most of the time, I walked around, or, I went from one activity to the next. So they're not staying with one activity or one game. A lot of times they're just playing with one kid. They're often kind of on the perimeter of things. So, based on my experience with my son, and because I couldn't find anything for him, which is actually what led me to social thinking, and doing this work, I wanted to create something specific for the kids I work with because there was nothing out there like this. And I really did my research. I mean, I looked all over the country. The closest thing I found was some like, boys groups in a therapist's office somewhere. And I said, I don't want to do that. I don't want this to feel like therapy in any way. So I created a bunch of different programs. So How to Hang Out, which is my school year program, and I do a fifth, sixth grade version now, seventh, eighth grade version. I'm going to have a high school version as well. In the summer, I have Trip Camp. Oh, the next word is supposed to be on a separate line. So my camp is held in Margate, New Jersey. And I'm also expanding it to, I'm doing 2 weeks in Los Angeles this year. And I have a program called Guy Stuff, which is a hygiene and puberty education program taught from a social learning perspective that I actually presented on a few years ago at this conference. And in the works, I have How to Do Recess, which is exactly to address, how do we play kind of unstructured games during recess. I also do a lot of individual work with kids on, what I call learning social, and kind of the umbrella for all of this. It's based in learning social from a male perspective because that's what I found was severely lacking in this, social learning field, we'll call it. So I want to talk a little about how I So I need to preface this slide by saying most of the kids I've worked with, if they are in middle school or older, they have been to therapy. Often they've been to multiple therapists and they've really developed an aversion to therapy. Some of them have been to social skills groups and their parents are always told, oh, he's a role model for the group because of that one size fits all approach. And they develop an aversion for that as well. So what's something that's really important to me is I don't want this to feel pathologizing to kids at all. And I don't want ADHD to ever feel pathologizing. So I want to give them some context for understanding social learning challenges, but I also explain to them ADHD in a way that's relatable because I can tell you I found that 95% of the kids I've worked with have never had ADHD explained in a way that's relatable or meaningful to them. So after I cover that, then if necessary, I explain social learning challenges, and this is how I frame it. So I say everybody's brain makes certain things easier to learn and harder to learn. For myself, my brain makes throwing a football and math harder to learn. It makes making friends easier to learn. And if your brain makes learning social harder to learn, there's nothing wrong with you at all. All that means is it's one of the subjects your brain makes, a little harder to learn. And I also explain it's really common, and guys your age don't talk about this with other guys, which is why you probably don't know how common it is. This is another How to Hang Out. So sometimes we'll do trips to local places. So obviously this was at bowling. The other thing I tell kids the first time I meet them, and I really say this with conviction, is I tell them there are kids in your school who would want to be friends with you, okay, and they don't know that they want to be friends with you yet. So you have to show them why they would like hanging out with you. And you can't expect them to do all the work here because all friendships are 50-50 because you have to do half and the other kids or the other kid has to do half. This is when sometimes when I've done the program, we'll, make food. So this, I use an executive function strategy to teach how to make grilled cheese. And then I let them do it on their own. I mean, obviously I'm in there, but I'm trying not to intervene at all. But with this thing about it, what I tell them about there are kids in your school who would want to be friends with you. One of the things I also do is I point out to kids, during the program at some point, kind of how I see that they make themselves endearing to other kids. So I'll say, I noticed that John, he purposely walked with you when we were going to ice cream. Or Noah sat with you in the van to bowling, and I saw you guys were talking about whatever game it was you were talking about. So I point out these different nuanced things that they don't pick up on themselves that shows when somebody likes them. And that's another really important thing to know, is that for a lot of the guys I work with, they're not always so aware when somebody is showing in more nuanced ways that they're connecting with them. So that's why I'm really big about pointing this out to them. So this is a video where I'm teaching some concepts. I want to mention that the videos you're going to see here, for the most part, are from my camp. The reason being is because I actually never thought to record any of the lessons during How to Hang Out, but I really teach the same concepts. So this is this summer from camp. Right? When we get older, what's called social expectations go up. People expect more of us as we get older. Okay? So one of the things, guys, when parents call me, you know what they always say? They say, my son gets along with younger kids and with adults than more with kids his age. You know why? Because younger kids will tolerate somebody being an information informer. Adults will tolerate somebody being an information informer. Kids your age will not tolerate it. Okay? So who thinks it's sometimes easier to be around younger kids or older kids or adults? Okay? Yeah. The other reason why, guys, and I want you to really hear this, Evan, okay, and everybody else, this is important. Adults sometimes and parents, think like, oh, my son has really good social skills or he needs help with this. But guys, at the end of the day, it's not teachers who are the judge of whether you're an information informer or social relator. It's not your parents to judge if you're an information informer and social relator. You know whose job that is? Other kids your age. Exactly, Simon. Yeah. Guys, who decides that if you're an information informer or social relator is kids your age? Okay? So that's why we're talking about this. Right? Oh, okay. So you heard me saying there that, other kids your age are the judge of your social skills. I really want to emphasize that point because, there's some different testing measures that kind of measure social skills. And I always think to myself, how can we really measure social skills? We can, there's one called the social responsiveness scale. Okay, fine. You're measuring social responsiveness. Basically, I'm just going to be kind of short about this is if I give you, a socially appropriate response to you saying hi to me, then, that proves it's evidence-based. But does that show if you are making yourselves endearing to other kids? Does it show if you're relatable to other kids? So what I want people to understand is that, the part of the abstractness of this whole field is that this is something that's really hard to measure unless you're looking to measure socially, scripted social responses. All right. So some of what I teach in How to Hang Out as well as camp. So situational awareness or reading the field, being flexible for the sake of being part of a group. For elementary school kids, reciprocal play skills, sharing imagination and sportsmanship. I often do that a lot with Legos when I work with younger kids. I teach how male friendships evolve, using humor appropriately, the work involved in building and sustaining friendships. How do you show interest in others so they know that you want to be friends? And how do you structure hanging out if somebody wants to come over? For a lot of kids, I find that having somebody over their house feels like too much pressure for them. They worry about how am I going to entertain them? Not all kids, but I find that pretty common. And most importantly, I teach perspective taking. And the language I use for this is something I developed. I teach that there's different types of thoughts called clutch thoughts, meaning, thoughts that have when somebody else feels comfortable around you. Neutral thoughts being somebody's aware that you're there, but they're not really thinking about you, and vice versa. And then cringy thoughts are when you feel uncomfortable around somebody because of their words or behaviors, or vice versa. This is kind of just a way, this picture here is, how I want to make a visual to show kind of the steps to hanging out, because that's the other thing that's hard for a lot of kids is, they think sometimes, okay, well, I want to play with Josh. So, I'm going to call him at like 8 o'clock on a Saturday night. They don't, because obviously they have difficulty with thinking ahead into the future. So I want to kind of show the sequence of the structure here of what we have to do to hang out. So this is the visual I use to show how guys form friendships. You see at the bottom here, I put gaming acquaintance on the same level as stranger. The reason for that is because a lot of times, kids will say, oh, I have friends, they're on Xbox. And the thing is, they really know nothing about them whatsoever, except for like their gamer tag. Now, keep in mind, I'm not talking about somebody from school who they play games with, or even like my son has friends who he's played games with online for years, and he's never met them, but kind of, knows a little more about them. But I want kids to understand that somebody you game with online is a stranger. And I've heard of kids buying games for other kids who they play with online because they want to play with them, and these kids are complete strangers. I mean, they don't even know if they're a kid or not. Um, and the other thing I explain to kids is that for most of the guys I work with, where they get stuck is going from school activity friend to friend. And it's because of that scaffolding piece that I showed in the last slide. That's really where they get stuck. But also, there tends to be a lot of fear about rejection here. And even if they don't have social anxiety, they are kind of fearful of taking friendships to the next level, particularly if they've been socially ostracized, at some point. All right, so this is a video where I talk about the different types of thoughts. One thing I want to mention when I do my programs in camp, I don't expect the kids to, kind of sit up straight and, listen, fully, be fully attentive. I let them, if they want to have a fidget toy, that's fine. If they want to lay down on the desk, that's fine. I want them to be comfortable because I know for a lot of kids with ADHD, it's easier for them to listen when they're comfortable. So if some kids look kind of disengaged, of course they get disengaged sometime. But the part of it is I really emphasize in the beginning that I want them to be comfortable, and whatever they need to do to help them pay attention, I'm okay with. Will, what's something that somebody could do during paddleboarding that would give you clutch thoughts about them? One of the other guys here. So if let's say you dropped your paddle, okay, and somebody said, "Here, Will," and they handed it to you, would that give you clutch thoughts about them or cringy thoughts? Okay. How about this, Will? How about you fell off your board and one of the guys said, "Will, are you okay?" What kind of thoughts would you have that he said that? Okay, good. Eddie, actually, I'm gonna call him Jackson. Jackson, what if there's other people there at stand up paddleboarding at the same time as us, and they're just kind of behaving and talking in a way that's expected for the situation? What types of thoughts? You're gonna have neutral thoughts about them. Okay. Okay, so the other thing I want to mention about this as well is you heard me say that I'm bringing this up after 2 days. I start doing this right away, but I don't explain it to the kids at first because I just want to see what their reaction is, and then I give them some context for understanding why I do that. And the boy who was standing up there, I have kids right on the board. He just wasn't writing at that very moment because I like to get them up and moving when I'm teaching just to keep them more engaged. So the How to Hang Out program, so it's real life teaching in semi-structured social situations. So again, I try to hang back as much as possible after I'm done teaching, and I really will address things with kids individually, and sometimes I address them out loud. And what I explain to kids is that if I'm addressing something, out loud, it's not because I'm trying to point you out. It's because this is something that everybody's brain can get better at learning. And obviously, I do it in a way that's not kind of punitive or shaming. So I don't find kids ever have a negative reaction to it when I kind of preface it by explaining that, I'm going to do that to everybody at some point, most likely. And I do. The other idea with how to hang out is that we're providing a natural experience of hanging out. Now, granted, a bunch of middle school kids might not typically make pizzas together like they are in this session. But it's an activity to do where they can kind of connect over, and have a conversation without the use of screens involved. So I teach the 30 minutes of some social learning concepts, followed by the making food or playing games, going out for ice cream. And again, I don't want to be part of the conversations here because it's not a natural social interaction. If you have an adult kind of intervening or kind of joining in the conversation, because that's not what's going to happen when they're at the lunch table at school. So teaching cognitive flexibility is essential to learning how to hang out. Obviously, we know a lot of kids with ADHD have difficulty with being flexible. So it's something that I find often many parents do not recognize about their sons when it comes to the reason why they lack social relationships. They might see it, but they don't call it, inflexibility. They might call it, the difficulty reading social cues. I also teach kids that being part of a group is more important than your specific interest. And this is a foreign concept to many kids. So, for example, I tell kids, if you get invited to go, to the movies and you don't really want to see the movie, you go. And the reason why is because the kid is not inviting you because they want you to see the movie. They're inviting you because they want to spend time with you. And if you say no, that's going to feel to them like you don't want to be with them and they're going to stop asking you. Sometimes I will hear parents, say things like, well, what activities are you going to do at camp because, or during how to hang out because he only likes certain things, and I have to explain to them, you're missing the bigger picture here. The activities don't matter. What matters is that they experience having fun being with a group of guys their age. So here you see, I talk about, the first group, what's expected when we're together. So we're thinking about the other guys and their thoughts about us based on what we say and what we do. So I'm kind of introducing the concept. I'm front loading the concept of perspective taking. We're going with the group plan, even if we don't feel like it, because that's what's expected. Group plan being what most, what everybody else is doing. And then we find out stuff the other guys like. So we have stuff to talk about. So showing an interest in others, finding out some of their interests, right? Rather than just having that one-sided conversation. All right. So another video from camp here. This is a week with the middle schoolers. The first two videos were with the weeks with the high school kids. And those kids were mostly 9th and 10th grade. These are between 6th grade and 8th grade. Who thinks they know what going with the group plan means? Raise your hand. What's that? Teddy, what does going with the group plan mean? Being like flexible with like what the group does and like we want to do like the group does and not just do what you want. Teddy, you won the $1 million prize because you explained that so perfectly, okay? What Teddy said is exactly right, guys. Going with the group plan means, say it one more time, Teddy, a little louder because I want everyone to hear it. Being flexible with what the group does and wanting to do what you do instead of just doing what you want. Perfect. I couldn't have said that any better. Can you write that, James? You don't have to put exactly, but just kind of what Teddy said about making your brain be flexible to do what the group wants, not just what you want. So, last thing about this, guys, let's talk about today specifically. What will going with the group plan look like, Teddy, when we're at the aqua park? Like, doing, like, what others want to do and, like, going with, like, what we're supposed to be doing and what other kids want to do. Okay, so, James, can you put aqua park, doing what the other kids are doing and what they want to do? Okay? That's great, Teddy. Thank you. Alex, what would going with the group plan look like when we're at the beach? Getting along with other people. So it's kind of like what Josh was saying. So when you said getting along with other people? Playing along with other people. Okay, yeah, perfect. How did you do with going with the group plan yesterday when we were walking on the boardwalk? Yeah. You did? Did I want to put a leash on you? Why did I want to put a leash on you yesterday? And it's not because I don't trust you, man. It's because I wanted you to be with the group, right? So that doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It just means your brain code to the line was turned down too low and you weren't thinking about it. Okay. One of the things I should mention is where I do my camp. It's the meeting hall of a church, and we were out and we do trips every day, and it's a block from the beach. So this is really why I picked it. So if you're trying to figure out where we are, that's what it is. It's just the meeting hall of a very underused church that's very conveniently located. Okay, so I want to show you some different strategies I teach. This is one of the ways I teach perspective taking. This is called a social behavior map. It's something that came from social thinking. So if you see up here, it says situation, that's kind of the context. So I did this with a boy in sixth grade, when I was working one-on-one with him. So travel basketball practice. And I brought this up because, his father told me how he was a little over eager in practice and the kids were getting irritated with him, his teammates. So he was a really good player, but he just gets a little too competitive to the point that the other kids don't like it. So we talk about the context of the situation, where they are, who are the people there. And then you see it says, behaviors that are expected given the situation and people, how others feel about behaviors, and then how others act or react based on how they feel about the behaviors. And then we look at how might one think or feel based on how they're treated by others. So if you see down where it says unexpected, we talked about some of the behaviors he was doing. So grabbing the ball from teammates' hands, slapping their arms, arguing with the coach, being super aggressive. And we, talked about that the other guy's thoughts were that they were, feeling annoyed, and how they reacted is they made some negative comments about him and they, retaliated. And then he didn't feel good about it. So this is really how we teach perspective taking. We have to teach a sequence of events to understand how our words and behaviors affect others based on the context of the situation, how they'll react to us, and then how we feel about ourselves based on, how they reacted to us. So it's very common for boys with ADHD who tend to be more impulsive or vocal. They evoke a negative reaction in others, like this boy here. And then they feel victimized when other kids, react negatively to them because they don't understand how their words or behaviors are impacting others. One of the things I want to tell you is that for kids who have had like a lot of anti-bullying education in school, they tend to say they're being bullied very easily because they're not realizing that their behavior evoked a negative response in kids. So another strategy is using declarative language to help model your internal dialogue. For the parents, this is something you can do at home, and this is what using declarative language sounds like. I should preface this by saying the training that I've done, so like social thinking and the work I've done in executive functioning, this comes from the speech language field. It does not come from the mental health field. So this is a strategy parents can use at home. It's using declarative language to help model your internal dialogue, or what I say, your own brain coach. I want to mention real quick that the work I use to teach social and actually executive functioning as well, it actually doesn't come from the mental health field. It comes from the speech language pathology field. And the reason I'm saying this is because, people often reach out to me and say, oh, do you know somebody in my area who does what you do? And I explain to them, no, this is my own creation because I sought all this training out on my own, because I just, I knew that I needed to get something that I wasn't finding elsewhere. So this was many, many years of training and traveling around the country to learn these different things. So anyway, so declarative language would sound like, I'm feeling kind of bored right now because you're telling me about Roblox, but you're not asking me any questions. Or I noticed that John came up and talked to you today at drop off. It looked like he was happy to see you. Or I was having cringy thoughts about that lady in line at the market because she had the speaker on her phone and everyone could hear her conversation. So notice that what I'm doing here is I'm not doing any prompting. I'm not saying do this, don't do this. I'm sharing my internal dialogue because when we do that, we help to model for kids what our own internal dialogue sounds like around perspective taking. So, some objections I sometimes hear from parents initially. Interestingly, this first one I hear a lot when I talk about, reading the field or situational awareness. They say, I don't want him to follow the crowd. And what I say to them is, well, if you don't want your son to conform at all, okay, well, then teach him basically how to work for himself and to live independently. Because, if being a nonconformist is important to you, then that's what you need to do. We all need to conform in some situations. And I think it's just people take it out of context. The other thing is, I will sometimes, particularly moms, they'll say, I don't want to hurt his feelings by always pointing out things like that. And particularly around uncomfortable topics like when kids have their hand on their private parts, which is something I address like every week of camp and in how to hang out and guy stuff as well, just because it's very common with boys in middle school. And here's what I tell parents when they say, I don't want to hurt his feelings, or I don't want to address So I wanted to explain a little bit about some of the objections I hear from parents when they're kind of new to this. This first one is I find particularly around when I'm teaching situational awareness and reading the field what I say to kids is, read the field, figure out what you're supposed to be doing right now. And sometimes parents will say, well, I don't want him to follow the crowd. And, I'll say, well, you don't want him to get his math book out when everybody else in class is, or you don't want him to be in line with everyone else when there's, a line at the movie theater to get popcorn. And what I say is, if you don't want him to conform at all, okay, teach him how to work independently, so he never has to conform to any situation. Conformity is part of life, right? We have to learn how to adapt to different situations. And that's what reading the field is. Sometimes when the example I just gave, when I said, I'm feeling kind of bored right now because, you're talking at me. Sometimes, I'll have particularly moms say, I don't think a father's ever said this to me, actually. They'll say, I don't want to hurt his feelings by always pointing out things like that. And what I explain to them is that either you can point it out or other kids in school can point it out, and they're not going to do it with the sensitivity, that you will. So my suggestion is you teach him this. The other thing is that, sometimes parents, again, moms in particular, they don't want to um, So I wanted to tell you about some of the objections I sometimes hear from parents when I introduce them to these concepts. So this one, I don't want him to follow the crowd. I hear a lot when they first learn about reading the field, because the language I use, I say, read the field and figure out what you're supposed to be doing right now. And somehow some parents take that out of context and think that means you're being a follower. So what I say is, so you don't want him to take out his math book in math class when everybody's doing it, or when you're in at the movie theater and he's in line to get food, you don't want him to kind of move up in line when everybody else does, because that's what reading the field is. I said it has nothing to do with being a follower. The other thing, like the example I used in the last slide where I said I'm feeling kind of bored right now because you're talking at me about Roblox and you're not asking me any questions. I sometimes will have moms, never dads, say, I don't want to hurt his feelings by always pointing out things like that. And what I tell parents is, if you're worried about protecting his feelings, you can't help him develop social competency. And that experiencing peer rejection or being ostracized for his social behaviors will affect him much more than trying to help him. And I always tell particularly moms, give your son some credit. He is not fragile. He is anti-fragile. And that's a big message I have for parents. The other thing I always want, and I'm really big on this, is I want parents to address behaviors that could make other people uncomfortable. So I'll give you an example. A lot of the kids I work with, I mostly see my age range really is kind of 10 to 15. A lot of boys in middle school tend to have their hand on their private parts a lot. And I tell parents, I say, call him on that every time he does it, okay? Because if you don't do it, then he's going to be made fun of in school. And I've had that happen to kids. And when they actually take my advice and do it, it does work. So what I always, say is kind of the overarching thing here is teaching social is about teaching accountability to other people. So some do's and don'ts for parents. So do help connect past successful social experiences with current or future experiences. That's what's called episodic memory, which is challenging for a lot of kids with ADHD. So remembering past experiences and the emotions attached to them. What I find is for a lot of kids with ADHD, they tend to not remember the emotions associated with past experiences or how they did things in the past unless there's a strong emotion attached to it. We want to teach them what you expect them to look for in unstructured and semi-structured social situations. So that's what reading the field is. So let me give you an example of the episodic memory one. So you had a good time bowling last time we went, so I'm sure you'll have a good time again, even if you don't know all the kids who will be there. So connecting emotion with a past experience to something in the present or near future. Here's the reading in the field example. When you're at karate tonight, your job is to watch how the other guys start conversations with each other when they see each other and what they look like when they come up to talk to each other. Remember that kids have to look around and notice what the other kids are doing so they can read the field. Some other things, make your kids be around similar age peers in social situations instead of gravitating towards younger kids or adults in social situations. One of the things parents always say to me is, my son gets along with younger kids or adults. It's not with kids his own age. Here's the reason why. Because they can control situations with younger kids. Younger kids have lower social expectations, and let's say with adults, let's say if they, if they're being an information informer and just talking at adults about their interests, adults are just going to like listen to them and say, uh-huh, and be polite. So what I really want to emphasize is they have to learn to interact with other kids their age. And if we explain why we need to do this and what we should be looking for, we're helping them to be intentional about this. So some other things, make them be around similar age peers in social situations instead of gravitating toward younger kids or adults. One of the things parents always say to me is, my son gets along better with younger kids or with adults than kids his age. Here's why. Because younger kids, they can control the situation with them. Younger kids also have much less social expectations and they might look at them as like a role model. So that's why they tend to get along with younger kids, not to mention that, in terms of their social and emotional age, it tends to be younger a lot. And with adults, they tend to gravitate towards adults because, particularly if they're the type to be an information informer, meaning they talk at people, adults are going to sit there and listen to them. And sometimes I even find that some, kids will get along better with like older teenagers because just older teenagers are going to kind of be a little more tolerant with them. And that's kind of, it's almost like, like a brother relationship where they might get annoyed sometimes, but they still like them. So the other thing we should do is teach how they've been able to get through new or uncomfortable situations successfully in the past. So when they've gone to like, let's say, a new activity, a new sport or something, and they might have been uncomfortable at first, or they were digging their heels in about going, but then they enjoyed it. That's how we help connect, their successes, their social successes and past experiences with what they can do in the near future. And the other thing I really want parents to understand is read between the lines. If they say those kids are weird, they're not like me. A lot of times I see boys with ADHD will be very critical of other kids with ADHD who do the exact same behaviors as they do. And again, it's because that perspective taking piece. They're not understanding how they're coming across to others, but they don't like that same behavior in others. Or sometimes I'll hear kids say things like, those kids are weird, they're not like me. Well, the thing is, well, they are like you, you're just not recognizing it. And sometimes, the reason why is because when kids go to social situations, if they don't connect with other kids, they have a propensity to say it was boring or those kids are weird because they're not going to say, you know what, I felt kind of isolated because everyone else seemed to be connecting and I wasn't. So that's what I mean by read between the lines. So some don'ts. Please don't hover during play dates or social situations. When I in Facebook parent groups, sometimes I see parents talk about how they hover over their kids when they have a play date or they have a friend over. Please don't do that, because if as soon as you start directing things, then you're denying them the opportunity to develop these skills organically. If you have to pull your son out for a minute to talk to him about something, that's fine, but don't stand there hovering, because the other thing is it could make the other kid uncomfortable, right? He's not going to be himself if he knows that you're monitoring him or the other kids who are there. Please don't accept the answers, "I don't care about having friends," or "my friends are on Xbox." When I hear kids say that, here's my response. I'd say, I know you're saying that, but I know you actually do care about having friends, because if you didn't, you wouldn't be kind of, speaking with any feeling in your voice right now, and you are. And I get that. And I normalize it for them. I say, I've heard so many guys your age say this, and here's why. And I tell them about other kids so they can see they have experiences to relate to. Another thing, if your son has some social anxiety, please do not accommodate it by allowing him to avoid social experiences. The more parents accommodate anxiety, it allows it to grow. And the way kids learn to get through anxiety is by seeing that they can get through these situations, and that anxiety always goes down. And again, please don't take their negativity about new experiences at face value. It's a reflection of difficulty connecting with other kids or being pushed out of their comfort zone into unfamiliar social experiences. I always tell parents when the kids start my programs, camp or how to hang out, I say, don't be surprised if he comes home and speaks negatively about it. That's normal for the first day. And parents will tell me, yep, that's exactly what he did. And then, the next day he was fine. Last thing, and this is almost not related to this at all, but please don't say think before you act. And that's just a pet peeve of mine, because what I tell parents is this. If he could think before he acted, he would. His brain development is not there yet. So saying think before you act is useless. So some of the work that's influenced how I teach social. So I mentioned Social Thinking. There's their website. I highly recommend the Declarative Language Handbook by Linda Murphy. I also have a video on my YouTube channel called ADHD Dude Live, where I interview Linda, and her work has been really influential on me. Dr. Michael Gorian, who studies gender-based education and really looks at things from a gender-based perspective. His work I've learned a lot from, and I really like Free Range Kids, which is a movement about giving kids more autonomy to help them develop resiliency and executive function and social skills. So I'm going to show you one more video, but just real quick, I wanted to tell you, feel free to join my Facebook group, YouTube. If you just type in ADHD Dude, you're welcome to subscribe. I'm on Instagram, Twitter. The stuff I'm really most active with, I guess, is YouTube. I try to put out a video every week. My videos for kids are in the Dude Talk playlist, and that's one of the videos I'm going to show you next. Okay, so this is one of my recent videos I made for kids. I try to keep all my videos for kids under 2 minutes long. Stay tuned. I want to explain to you why that might be giving them cringy thoughts. I know that, dude. What's up, guys? It's Ryan, ADHD Dude. So, guys, if you sometimes text one of your friends or another kid you want to be friends with over and over, or message them, whatever, they might start to have cringy thoughts about you. Cringy thoughts are when somebody is feeling kind of uncomfortable, or they're having weird thoughts about your words or behaviors. And you might be saying to yourself right now, ADHD Dude, no, they don't have cringy thoughts about me. But here's the thing, guys. Everybody's brain works differently, and what your thoughts are not what somebody else's thoughts are. So for a lot of guys whose brains work with ADHD, sometimes it's hard for them to think about other kids' thoughts about them, okay? So what we have to do is we have to use our brain coach, that voice in our head we use to talk to ourselves, to say, I wonder what his thoughts about my words or behavior are right now based on what I'm doing. So the thing is, guys, anytime you start messaging somebody over and over and they're not responding, it's almost definite they're going to start to have cringy thoughts, okay? So if you want to reach out to somebody, cool, do it once, and if they don't get back to you within a few hours, it probably means they're busy or they don't feel like talking right now, and that's okay, all right? But remember, if you start texting them or messaging them over and over, they're probably going to start to have cringy thoughts, and then they might not respond to you at all because of the thoughts they're having, okay? So just be cool about it, lay back a little bit, text message once. If they don't respond, it's okay. You can try another thing. All right, hope this is helpful. Please make sure to like the video, and I'll talk to you soon. See ya. So So I actually made that video because that was a parent request from my Attitude Magazine page, because her son, it was, just texting kids over and over to like go online and play games. And one of the things I find, a lot of boys with ADHD, when they're really socially motivated, they can get clingy sometimes with other boys, and they can also get really possessive as well. So this is something I've seen a lot, so that's why I wanted to make the video. So, in conclusion, I just wanted to show you this, because these are not pictures that you're going to see on a website for social skills groups, and these are not pictures you're going to see, for whatever. So these are pictures I took during camp and How to Hang Out. And I wanted to show you these because these are not pictures you're going to see on the website for a social skills group. But this is what it can look like when boys connect. It doesn't have to be sitting across from somebody playing checkers or saying, "What do you like to do?" You see the boys in the middle, they're not even making eye contact, but they were having, a conversation with each other. And I could tell they were kind of, having this conversation, and because I eavesdropped a little bit, and they were kind of, expressing some vulnerability. So this is the different ways boys can connect, but it's not the first thing that we necessarily think of. So that's why I wanted to show you this. So thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. I'm happy to answer questions. And please feel free to reach out to me and join my Facebook group. Check out the YouTube channel. And thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So to finish up, I wanted to show you these pictures that I took during my camp and How to Hang Out. And I wanted to show you these because these are not pictures you're going to see on a website for a social skills group. But this is what it can look like when boys connect. And I just took these, because it was just, this organic kind of, moment that was happening that I think really kind of encompasses that, the way boys connect is different than the way girls connect with each other. It's different than the way, boys and girls connect with each other. So I just wanted to share this with you.